A Fidelity study from 2021 found something that didn't make many headlines. The investors with the best long term returns weren't the most active. They weren't the most sophisticated. A disproportionate number of them had simply forgotten they had the account. That result sounds like good news for compounding. And it is, mostly. Here's what the study doesn't tell you. Forgetting the account only works if you had enough in it for the math to actually do something while you weren't looking. Below a certain size, time alone doesn't save you. The balance just sits there, growing at a pace you could almost recreate by leaving cash in a drawer. So why does every explanation of compounding skip that part entirely? There's a specific dollar threshold where the equation fundamentally changes. Below it, you are the engine. Your income, your deposits, your savings rate. That's where almost all the growth comes from. Above it, the market starts doing serious work on your behalf. That shift is what this video is about. And if nobody told you it existed, you've probably spent years interpreting slow progress as a personal failure when it's actually just a phase with a name. My name is Alex, and if you've ever stared at a balance that looks almost identical to what you put in, keep watching, because I'm going to show you exactly where that threshold sits and how the math changes when you cross it. Once you understand this, you'll stop measuring your progress against the wrong part of the curve. The place to start is a myth, specifically the penny analogy, and what it accidentally teaches people to expect. Here's something worth sitting with for a second. The analogy that introduced most of us to compounding is mathematically impossible. Not exaggerated, not simplified for clarity, impossible. You've heard it. A penny that doubles every day for 30 days. By day 30, you've got over $5 million. The point is supposed to be small things, given enough time, become enormous. And that part is true. The problem is the number hidden inside the example. A penny doubling every day is a 100% daily return. That's not an optimistic assumption. That's a different universe entirely. The average annual return of the S&P 500, that's the index tracking the 500 largest US companies, has been roughly 10% per year over the last century. Adjusted for inflation, you're looking at somewhere between 6 and 7% in real terms. That's actually a strong number. Over long periods, it's genuinely impressive. But it's not 100% a day. It's not even 100% a decade. And the gap between those two things is not just a rounding error. It's the difference between a story and reality. Run the real math on that penny. Start with 1 cent. Apply 7% annually. Let it run for 30 years. You know what you end up with? Not 5 million, not 5,000, not even $5. You end up with less than 11 cents. The fantasy penny multiplied by a factor of 500 million. The real penny barely moved. Now, I'm not saying the penny analogy was designed to mislead anyone. It wasn't. It's a teaching tool, and it does one job well. It shows what exponential growth looks like when the conditions are right. The issue is that most people absorb the shape of that story. Small input, massive output. Just add time, and carry it into their real investment accounts, where the conditions are completely different. And that mismatch creates a specific kind of frustration. Consider someone who graduated around 2018, landed a stable job in project management in the Midwest, and started contributing $400 a month to their 401k, that's their employer-sponsored retirement account, right away. By early 2026, they've been at it for roughly 7 years. They've put in somewhere around $33,000 of their own money. Their balance, assuming average market returns and a modest employer match, sits around $46,000, which sounds decent, until they do the mental math and realize that the growth on top of their contributions is about $13,000 over 7 years. Less than $2,000 a year. They're doing everything right, and the number still feels almost insultingly small. That feeling isn't a sign that compounding is broken. It's a sign that they're still in the part of the curve nobody warned them about. The long, flat beginning, the section of the graph that every financial diagram compresses into a thin line at the bottom, because it's not the exciting part, but it's where almost everyone lives for the first decade of their investing life. Here's the thing about that flat section. It's not a flaw in the system. It's a structural feature of how exponential growth actually works. And the curve has to be flat before it can be steep. You can't skip to the steep part. There is no hack that jumps you from year 2 to year 20. What you can do, and what actually matters, is understand why the flat section feels the way it does, so you don't make a decision based on a feeling that the math has already accounted for. Most people who quit investing early don't quit because they ran out of money. They quit because progress felt invisible. And progress felt invisible because nobody told them that for the first stretch, almost all of the growth in their account would come from one source: them, not the market, not compounding, just their own deposits, showing up month after month. That changes, but it only changes after you cross a specific threshold. Seasoned investors have a name for it. They call it the compounding minimum. And understanding where that line sits is what separates the people who make it through the flat part from the ones who don't. Most financial concepts have a threshold, a point where the rules quietly change. Compounding has one too, and almost nobody talks about it in concrete terms. Start here. You have $1,000 invested. The market has a solid year, up 8%. You made $80. That's not nothing, but it's also not life-changing. It doesn't even register emotionally. You'd spend more than that on a weekend without thinking twice. Now take someone with $100,000 in the same account, same year, same 8%. They made $8,000. That's a car payment for 7 months. That's a vacation. That's a number you actually feel. Same return, same market, completely different experience. And that gap, that difference in what 8% actually does to your life, is the whole point. Compounding isn't a switch that flips on the day you open a brokerage account. It's a mathematical relationship between your base and your rate of return. When the base is small, the return is small in dollar terms, regardless of the percentage. The percentage looks fine on paper. The dollars feel almost meaningless in practice. And that disconnect between the rate that looks good and the outcome that feels invisible is what drives people to make bad decisions in the early years. Here's a way to think about it. Imagine two people carrying buckets to fill a pool. One has a bucket that holds a cup of water. The other has a bucket that holds 5 gallons. They walk to the tap at exactly the same speed, fill up, and walk back the same number of times. Same effort, same process, completely different results. The person with the small bucket isn't doing anything wrong. They just don't have the container to make the trips count yet. That's what investing below the compounding minimum feels like. You're doing the work. You're showing up. The mechanism just doesn't have enough to work with. So what is the actual number? It's not identical for everyone. It shifts based on your contribution rate, your expected return, and your timeline. But the figure that comes up consistently among serious long-term investors, and that the math tends to confirm, is somewhere around $100,000. That's the level where your annual investment gains start to rival, and then exceed, what you're contributing yourself each year. Let's make that concrete. Say you're contributing $600 a month to your retirement account. That's $7,200 a year from your own paycheck. At a 7% annual return, a portfolio of $100,000 generates $7,000 in gains. Right around that mark, the market is essentially matching your contributions dollar for dollar. Keep growing past it, and the market starts outpacing you. The engine shifts. You go from being the primary source of growth in your account to being a supporting player in a system that's starting to run itself. Before that point, you are the compounding. Your income, your savings rate, your discipline to not touch it. Those are the variables that move the needle, not the market. That's not a pessimistic observation. It's actually clarifying, because it tells you exactly where to focus your energy when you're in the early years. The answer isn't to find better investments or obsess over portfolio allocation. The answer is to get your base up faster. A 34-year-old nurse in Nashville recently told a financial planning forum that she'd been maxing out her Roth IRA. That's an individual retirement account where your money grows tax-free for 4 years straight, and still felt like she was spinning her wheels. Her balance was sitting at just under $38,000. Technically, she was doing everything right, but she was still deep in the flat zone, still years away from the threshold where the math starts working with her instead of just alongside her. Nobody had told her the threshold existed. She had no way to know she was right on schedule. That's the cost of not having a name for this phase. You can't navigate a stretch of road you don't know is coming. And once you understand where the compounding minimum sits, the next question becomes obvious. What is it actually going to take to get there? Because the investors who cross that line fastest aren't necessarily the ones earning the most. They're the ones who understood a specific rule, one that most people only discover after they've already spent years learning it the hard way. Investors call it the $100,000 wall, and the math behind it is more precise than the name suggests. Charlie Munger was Warren Buffett's business partner for over 50 years. He helped build one of the most successful investment track records in history. And at some point, when asked about the hardest part of accumulating wealth, he didn't say market crashes. He didn't say inflation. He said getting to the first $100,000. A man who eventually managed tens of billions of dollars thought the distance between 0 and 100,000 was the most brutal stretch of the entire journey. That's worth taking seriously. But here's what most people miss when they hear that quote. They take it as motivational, a reminder to push through the hard part. What Munger was actually describing wasn't emotional difficulty. It was a mathematical reality. The first $100,000 is harder, not because it requires more willpower. It's harder because the math is working against you in a way it never will again. Here's what the numbers actually show. When your portfolio sits below $100,000, roughly 90% of your account growth comes directly from your own contributions. Your deposits, your paycheck, you are the growth engine. The market is along for the ride, but it's not pulling much weight yet. That ratio flips slowly as your base grows. By the time you're sitting at $250,000, the market is contributing meaningfully. At $500,000, it starts to dominate. But below that first wall, you're doing almost all of the work, and the math will make sure you feel every bit of it. Think about what that means in practice. Two people start investing at the same time. Both earn a 7% annual return. The first starts with $5,000 and contributes $500 a month. The second starts with $5,000 and contributes $1,000 a month. After 5 years, the first person has around $42,000. The second has around $72,000. The difference isn't market performance, it isn't luck. It's the size of the deposits. Below the wall, the contribution rate is the dominant variable. Almost nothing else comes close. This is where a lot of well-meaning financial advice quietly leads people in the wrong direction. The conversation about asset allocation, whether you should be 60% stocks and 40% bonds, or whether you should tilt toward international funds. That conversation matters eventually. But when your portfolio is sitting at $20,000 or $30,000, shifting your allocation by 10% in any direction might move your annual return by half a percentage point. On $30,000, that's $150 a year. Meanwhile, picking up one freelance client or negotiating a $4,000 raise does 30 times more work. The math doesn't lie. Below the wall, income and savings rate are the levers. Portfolio construction is a distraction. Consider Marcus, a 31-year-old graphic designer in Atlanta, earning $68,000 a year. He'd spent 2 years carefully researching ETFs. Those are exchange-traded funds, essentially baskets of stocks you can buy like a single share, rebalancing quarterly, reading about factor investing. His portfolio sat at $26,000, optimized, thoughtfully constructed, and almost entirely dependent on his next paycheck to grow. The energy he was spending on allocation decisions would have compounded far more powerfully if he'd spent it finding one more client a month. That's not a knock on Marcus. It's a knock on the advice ecosystem that handed him a $100,000 conversation when he had a $26,000 problem. The wall is real, and the people who get over it fastest are the ones who stop treating the early phase like an optimization problem and start treating it like a construction project. You're not fine-tuning a machine yet. You're building the foundation it runs on. Getting to $100,000 requires a different mindset than everything that comes after. More income, higher savings rate, fewer decisions about where the money goes, and more decisions about how to generate more of it. Once you're over the wall, the game changes completely. And the single most powerful variable in determining how quickly that happens isn't how much you earn today. It's how much time you have left, which is exactly what the raw math of starting early makes uncomfortably clear. Two brothers, same parents, same house growing up, roughly the same financial situation as adults. One starts investing at 22, the other waits until 32. By the time they both retire at 65, the first brother has roughly twice the money, not because he earned more, not because he made smarter picks. He just started 10 years earlier and never stopped. That 10-year head start on a normal salary with normal contributions produces a gap that no amount of catching up can fully close. That's not a motivational story. That's arithmetic. Time is the one variable in the compounding equation that you cannot buy, negotiate, or optimize your way around. Every other input, your contribution amount, your return rate, your asset allocation, can be adjusted later. Time cannot. Once a year passes without money invested, and that year is gone from the equation permanently, and the math of what that costs is far more severe than most people ever sit down and calculate. Here's a concrete way to see it. Say your goal is to have an additional $300,000 by retirement. If you have 40 years ahead of you, you need to invest roughly $20,000 today and never add another cent. The market does the rest. Wait 10 years and start with 30 years instead. Now you need around $40,000 to hit the same number. Wait another decade, down to 20 years, and you're looking at nearly $78,000 as your starting point. Same destination, same assumed return of 7% annually. The only variable that changed was time. And every decade you waited roughly doubled the price of admission. I read that again slowly because it deserves to land. Every decade of delay approximately doubles what you need to invest to reach the same outcome. That's not a gentle penalty. That's the most aggressive tax you will ever pay, and it doesn't show up on any bill. It just quietly reduces what's available to you at the end. This is why the advice to start early feels almost patronizing when you're young. When you're 24 and earning $45,000 a year and trying to cover rent, a car, student loans, and something resembling a social life, being told that time is your greatest asset sounds like something embroidered on a pillow. It doesn't feel actionable. But the people who figure out how to take it seriously, even in small amounts, end up in a fundamentally different position than the ones who wait until everything feels more settled. Because here's the thing about waiting until it feels right. It almost never feels right. There's always a reason to delay. The market looks uncertain, the salary isn't quite there yet, there's a big expense coming. Those reasons don't disappear. They just get replaced by new ones. Meanwhile, the clock keeps running. Consider Priya, a 28-year-old teacher in Phoenix earning $52,000 a year. She started putting away $250 a month at 23, straight out of college, into a low-cost index fund. Nothing sophisticated. No stock picks. No rebalancing strategy. By 28, she has roughly $17,000 saved. That number doesn't look impressive yet. She's still deep in the flat zone, still years from the wall. But those 5 years of contributions are already worth more than they appear, because they are the oldest money in her account. They have the most time left to compound. In 40 years, assuming a 7% annual return, that's $17,000 alone, without a single additional contribution, grows to over $250,000. The money she invested before she turned 25 does more work over her lifetime than almost anything she contributes afterward. That's the part that doesn't fit neatly into a chart. Early contributions don't just grow, they grow for longer. And longer, in compounding, isn't a small advantage. It's the whole advantage. So time is the engine. But knowing you need to start early doesn't tell you what to actually do with the years between now and the wall. That requires a plan, not a complicated one, but a specific 3-step strategy, one built around exactly how the math works in the early phase, before the market starts doing the heavy lifting for you. Most investing advice is written for people who are already past the hard part. The books, the podcasts, the YouTube channels, most of it assumes you've already built a meaningful base, and now you're trying to grow it intelligently. That's useful, eventually, but if you're still climbing toward the wall, most of that advice is solving the wrong problem. What you need in the early phase isn't sophistication, it's a clear sequence. There are 3 things that actually move the needle before compounding takes over. They're not secrets, but the order matters, and most people get it wrong. The first is building the base, and this means one thing above everything else: focus on income. Below $100,000, your savings rate is the most powerful variable in the equation. But the savings rate is a function of 2 numbers: what you earn and what you spend. Most early phase advice hammers the spending side. Cut this, cancel that, skip the thing you enjoy. And look, unnecessary spending is worth addressing, but there's a ceiling on how much cutting can accomplish. You can only reduce expenses to 0. Income has no ceiling. A $4,000 raise, a single freelance project, one additional income stream. Any of those can do in a month what 6 months of aggressive budgeting might achieve. When you're under the wall, the question to ask yourself isn't where can I spend less, it's where can I earn more. That reframe alone changes the entire early phase strategy. The second step is protecting the base. This is where most people have a gap they don't know about. An emergency fund sounds like basic, boring advice, and it is basic. It's also load-bearing infrastructure for your entire compounding timeline. Here's why. When an unexpected expense hits, a medical bill, a transmission, a job gap, and you don't have liquid savings to cover it, the money has to come from somewhere. For most people, that somewhere is their investment account. And every time you pull money out of an investment account early, you're not just losing the dollars you withdrew. You're losing every future dollar those dollars would have generated. You're resetting a portion of your compounding clock. The math on that is brutal. Withdrawing $8,000 from a portfolio at age 30, assuming a 7% annual return over 35 years, doesn't cost you $8,000. It costs you roughly $86,000 by retirement. One emergency, one gap in the safety net. That's the actual price. A reasonable emergency fund for most households in 2026 sits somewhere between 3 and 6 months of essential expenses. If your monthly costs run around $4,000, you're targeting somewhere between $12,000 and $24,000 in a high-yield savings account, completely separate from your investment portfolio. Not invested, not optimized, just there, boring and available. Think of it as the protection that keeps your compounding clock running, even when life gets expensive. The third step is rethinking what progress looks like. This one is harder than it sounds. When you're in the flat zone, checking your investment balance regularly is almost counterproductive. The number moves slowly. It mostly reflects your contributions. It doesn't look like the chart yet, and it won't for a while. Watching it too closely is like staring at wet concrete waiting for it to dry. The process is working. You just can't see it happening in real time. Instead, track your savings rate. That's the percentage of your take-home income you're directing toward your investment accounts each month. If you're earning $5,000 a month after tax and investing $600, your savings rate is 12%. That number is something you can actually control and improve. It tells you whether the runway is getting longer, regardless of what the market did last quarter. Think of each dollar you save as another foot of runway. The portfolio isn't the plane yet. It's the ground the plane needs to take off from. More runway doesn't guarantee the flight, but without enough of it, the plane never leaves the ground. And the most clarifying question you can ask yourself right now isn't, how is my portfolio performing? It's how long is my runway, and what am I doing this month to extend it? That's the whole strategy. 3 steps in order, applied consistently. Build the base by focusing on income. Protect the base with a real emergency fund. And measure the right thing while the math catches up to you. None of it is glamorous, but it's the sequence that actually gets people over the wall. And once they're over it, everything the compounding chart promised finally starts to become real. Here's what this all comes down to. Compounding is real. The chart is real. But the chart has a phase nobody labels. A long, flat stretch where the math is technically working and emotionally invisible at the same time. That phase isn't a malfunction. It's the structure. And now you know it's coming. A few things worth holding on to. Below $100,000, you are the engine. Income and savings rate matter more than any investment decision you'll make. Time is the one input you can never recover once it's gone. An emergency fund isn't cautious thinking. It's compounding protection. And progress in the early phase is measured in runway built, not curve climbed. The question worth sitting with now is this. Look at your own situation. Are you treating this phase like an optimization problem or like a construction project? And because the strategy that gets you over the wall is different from the strategy that grows what's on the other side, which raises something worth exploring next. Once compounding does start working in your favor, what quietly erodes it? Because there are forces working against that curve that most people never account for. That's where this conversation goes next.